Before this story starts, one thing. When the moment hits you, drop one word in the comments. Whatever you felt, just one word. I am reading every single one, every time. Now, what follows is a transcript of an audio recording. It was found in the personal archive of a Keth-Ra soldier named Vel-Ka-Dorn, filed among his private records, dated approximately 3 years after the Battle of the Kessel Corridor. It is a recording of Vel-Ka-Dorn speaking to his child at bedtime. The child's name, based on later records, was Wrath. He was 4 years old when this recording was made. Vel-Ka-Dorn never spoke publicly about the Battle of the Kessel Corridor. He gave no interviews. He filed no personal accounts. He attended no commemorations. He did one thing. On one night 3 years after, he sat on the edge of his child's sleeping platform and told the story the way he wanted it told. The recording was found by his family after his death and donated to the historical archive with the note, "He always said Wrath needed to know. Now everyone should know." Vel-Ka-Dorn, are you settled? Good, put your head down. I am going to tell you a story. Not a made-up story. You know I do not tell made-up stories. A real one. This one happened to me before you were born, when I was still in the fleet. Are you comfortable? Good. Then listen. This is the story of the 11 minutes, and why I came home different from how I left. You know that I was a soldier. You have seen my service record on the wall. You have asked me about it before, and I have told you some things and not other things, and you have been patient with me about the things I did not tell you, and I appreciate that, because some things take time to be ready to tell. This one I am ready to tell. I am telling it to you specifically because of something that happened today. You came home from school, and you told me that your teacher said that humans were easy opponents in historical engagements, and that the early battles demonstrated that conclusively. And I watched your face when you said it, and you believed it. And I decided tonight that I was going to tell you this story, because your teacher was not there. I was. First, you need to understand what the situation was. The year was, I will tell you the year another time. You do not need years yet. It was 3 years before you were born. I was a junior officer in the Keth-Ra Conquest Legion, which at that point had been the most successful military force in this galactic region for 180 years. 180 years. We had fought in 60 campaigns, and we had won every single one. Our general at the time was Drath Kavel. He was 400 years old. He had been in the military for 270 of those years. He had never lost an engagement. He had a reputation that I am going to describe carefully, because reputations matter, and has mattered a great deal to us who served under him. His reputation was this. He was the best general of his generation because he never underestimated anything, and he never overestimated anything. He assessed accurately, and he acted on his assessments, and his assessments were right. That was who we served under. The Kessel Corridor was a transit route. It ran through a section of contested space that several civilizations had interest in, and a human convoy had been using it, and the general had decided that the corridor needed to come under Keth-Ra control. Not because of the humans specifically, they were considered a minor factor at that point. Because of the corridor's strategic value. The humans were, in the military assessment at the time, a secondary concern. Their technology was rated as Class 3 by our systems. Their fleet was small by galactic standards. Their combat experience in galactic engagements was limited. The assessment said, expect minimal resistance, expect quick resolution, expect standard outcome. The general looked at the assessment. He looked at the human fleet deployment in the corridor. And then he said something that I want you to remember because it is relevant to the rest of the story. He said, their weapons are primitive. This will not take long, and he laughed, and the officers around him laughed, and I was new enough that I laughed too. I did not know yet what I was looking at. I want to tell you what I was looking at. The human fleet in the Kessel Corridor consisted of 43 vessels. Our fleet consisted of 212. Their vessels were, by every technical specification we had, inferior to ours, slower top speeds, less powerful primary weapons, lighter defensive shielding. The assessment was accurate. In a direct comparison of specifications in every single category, our equipment was better. I want you to understand this clearly because what happened in the 11 minutes is going to be confusing if you do not understand that the specifications were accurately assessed. The problem was not the specifications. The problem was what the specifications did not tell us. And what the specifications did not tell us was what those 43 vessels were going to do with what they had. Specifications tell you what something can do. They do not tell you what something will do. And what the humans were going to do was something that no specification could have predicted, because what they were going to do was not in the manual. I was on the bridge of the command vessel when the engagement began. The general had positioned our fleet in the standard formation, 212 vessels arranged to maximize coverage and minimize vulnerability. The formation had been used in 60 campaigns. It was effective. The humans were positioned at the far end of the corridor, in a formation that our tactical analysts described, when they saw it, as irregular. One of the analysts said, "They do not seem to be using a standard formation." Another said, "Their positioning makes no tactical sense by our models." The general looked at the formation and he said, "It does not matter, they have 43 ships, we have 212. Engage." And we engaged. And for the first 40 seconds it went the way the general expected. Our primary weapons made contact with their forward vessels. The contact was effective. 2 of their vessels were disabled in the first pass. The general said, "As expected." And then the 11 minutes started. I am going to tell you what happened in the 11 minutes the way I experienced them, which is not the same as the way the official record describes them. The official record describes positions and maneuvers and tactical outcomes. What I experienced was something different. I experienced confusion. Sustained, complete, total confusion in myself and in everyone around me on that bridge, including the general, for 11 consecutive minutes. I want to describe the confusion because I think the confusion is the important part. Not the tactics, those are in the record. The confusion, because I have spent 3 years understanding what produced the confusion, and what produced it is the most significant thing I have learned in my military career, and I want you to learn it now so you do not have to learn it the way I did. The confusion began at approximately 50 seconds into the engagement. At 50 seconds, the human fleet stopped doing what our tactical models had predicted it would do. Our tactical models are built on extensive data from 60 campaigns. They predict, with high accuracy, how fleets of various sizes and capabilities will respond to initial contact. The predictions are based on the principle that opposing commanders will try to minimize losses and maximize effective use of their capabilities. This is rational. This is what every fleet in 60 campaigns had done. The humans stopped doing this at 50 seconds. They did not try to minimize losses. They did not try to maximize effective use of their capabilities in the standard sense. They did something that our models had no framework for. They traded. The analyst on my left said, "They are accepting contact to gain position." The analyst on my right said, "That is irrational." The first analyst said, "I know." The second analyst said, "Why are they doing that?" And then there was a pause, and then the first analyst said, "I think they have a plan." And the second analyst said, "For what?" And the first analyst did not answer. Because at that moment, at approximately 70 seconds into the engagement, the plan became visible. And when it became visible, the bridge went quiet. I need to explain something about our shielding system before I tell you what happened. Our vessels have a shielding system that operates on a specific frequency. The frequency is calibrated to our weapon systems, which means our weapons pass through our own shields. This is important because it means we can fire while shielded. It is a significant tactical advantage. We have had it for 100 years. It has contributed to the success of 60 campaigns. Every species we have engaged in those 60 campaigns has had shielding systems that operate on different principles. The frequency-calibrated shielding is specific to our technology. No other species has developed it. This has been true for 100 years. I want you to remember this before I tell you what happened at 70 seconds. At 70 seconds, 12 human vessels moved simultaneously into positions that our tactical models rated as disadvantageous for them. They moved into our primary fire zones, into the positions where our weapons were most effective. The analysts said, "They are moving into our kill zones. This makes no sense." The general said, "They are poorly trained. Continue the engagement." And then the 12 vessels fired, not at our vessels, at frequencies that our shielding system was calibrated to pass through, at the specific frequency our own weapons used, frequencies that, by logic of our shielding design, our shields did not block, frequencies that, as our tactical designers had determined 100 years ago and had never reconsidered since, no opposing species would use because no opposing species would know to use them. The humans had been watching us for long enough to learn which frequencies our shields did not block, and they had built weapons that fired on those frequencies. And at 70 seconds they fired those weapons, and our shields did not stop them. And the bridge went quiet. The next 10 minutes were, "I am going to be honest with you, Wrath, because you are old enough for honesty even at 4, and the honest word is chaos. Not the chaos of being overwhelmed. The chaos of being in a situation where the assumptions you were using to make decisions were wrong, and you knew they were wrong, but you were still making decisions faster than you could correct the assumptions, and every decision based on a wrong assumption was producing a wrong outcome. The general was issuing orders. The orders were based on 60 campaigns of experience. The experience was not applicable to this situation, because this situation did not match any of the 60. The orders were wrong, not because the general was not a brilliant commander, because brilliant commanders who are using the wrong framework are wrong in ways that their brilliance cannot compensate for. You can be the most brilliant person in a room and still be wrong if you are solving the wrong problem. The general was solving the problem he had prepared for. The humans had brought a different problem. I want to tell you specifically what the humans did in the 11 minutes because I think the specific things matter. They did not just exploit the shield frequency vulnerability, though they did that, and it was significant. They did 3 other things simultaneously that I have spent 3 years thinking about and that I want to share with you. The first thing, while the 12 vessels were firing on the shield frequency, the other 31 vessels were doing something that looked to our tactical systems like retreat. They were moving back, away from the engagement. Our models flagged this as a positive development. Opposing forces retreating is a standard indicator of a favorable engagement. The retreat was not a retreat, it was positioning. The 31 vessels were moving to positions where, when the main engagement produced the movement it produced, they would be exactly where they needed to be. They were not retreating. They were getting into place for what came next, and our models called it a retreat, and we responded to it as a retreat, and we moved in response to it as though it were a retreat, and when we had moved, we were in the positions the humans needed us to be in. The second thing, at approximately 4 minutes into the 11, the human commander sent a communication. Not a demand for surrender, we were still ahead in absolute numbers. Not a tactical communication. A question. The communication said, "How long do you want to continue this?" I was on the bridge when it came in. I saw the general's face when he read it. I watched him for a moment before he responded. And what I saw on his face in that moment was something I had never seen on his face in 3 years of service under him. He was recalculating, not recalculating tactics, recalculating the situation, which meant the situation was not what he had calculated it to be, which meant all of his calculations were based on a wrong picture, and he knew it. The third thing, the 11 minutes ended not because one side was defeated in the conventional sense. It ended because the general made a decision. He said, "Disengage." And we disengaged. We had lost 31 vessels. They had lost 6. We had been in an engagement for 11 minutes with a fleet less than a quarter of our size using weapons we had classified as primitive, and we disengaged with more than 10 times the losses they had taken. The general disengaged, and he never laughed at the humans again. I want to tell you what happened after, because the after is important. After we disengaged, there was a long silence on the bridge. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people has just experienced something that none of their training prepared them for and nobody knows what to say yet. The general stood at the viewport looking out at the corridor for a long time. Then he turned around. And he said something that I have been thinking about for 3 years and that I think about every day and that I am telling you tonight because I want you to have it earlier than I had it. He said, "We classified their weapons as primitive. We were correct. Their weapons were primitive by our specifications." He said, "What we did not classify was how they would use them." He said, "We looked at what they had and we made a judgment about what they could do with what they had. And that judgment was wrong." He said, "Never judge what something can do based on what it has. Judge based on what it is willing to do with what it has." And then he said, "I have never been willing to do what they did in that corridor, to accept those losses to gain that position, to trade in that way." He said, "I do not know if I should be or not, but I need to understand why they were." He said, "Because a species that is willing to do what they did in that corridor with those weapons and that fleet is going to be a very different problem than the assessment suggested." He said, "Find out everything you can about them." He said it quietly, without anger, without the specific humiliation that I had expected given what had just happened. He said it the way someone says something when they have just understood that they have a great deal to learn and they want to start learning immediately. I need to tell you about the general before the battle, because to understand the 11 minutes you have to understand what he was before them. He was not a bad man. I want you to know that. He was not cruel. He was not reckless. He was, by every measure that his world and his profession and his tradition valued, excellent. He had risen to his position through ability, through genuine, demonstrated, repeatedly tested ability over 270 years of service. He was careful, was thorough. He prepared. When he said the weapons were primitive and laughed, he was not being lazy or arrogant in the way that lazy or arrogant commanders are arrogant. He was being confident based on evidence. He had evidence. 60 campaigns, 180 years, every engagement he had ever committed to, he had won. His confidence was built from real things. His laugh was the laugh of someone who has been right 400 times and is about to be right the 401st time. And when I say this is the most important thing I want you to understand about the 11 minutes, I mean it. The general was not wrong because he was bad at his job. He was wrong because he had been so right for so long that he had stopped being able to see clearly. The success had made a blind spot. And the blind spot was this. He could see what the humans had. He could not see what the humans were. And what they were was not in the file. I want to tell you about Vel-Saketh, because I mentioned them earlier and because they matter to understanding the Kessel Corridor. The Vel-Saketh were a warrior species, the most formidable species the Keth-Ra had ever encountered before the humans. They fought us for 11 years. They threw everything they had at us, wave after wave, and they were magnificent in their way, and we eventually won because we had more and they ran out. But here is the thing about the Vel-Saketh that I want you to hold. They fought the way we expected them to fight. They charged, they committed, they met force with force, they died gloriously. They were, by every measure of a warrior civilization, the ideal opponent. They made no surprises. They did the thing they were built to do, and they did it with everything they had. And that is why we won, eventually, despite how long it took, because we knew what they were going to do. We knew because they were going to do what warrior civilizations do. And once you know what someone is going to do, you can survive it long enough to outlast it. The humans were the opposite of the Vel-Saketh. The humans did not do what we expected. They did not do what the file said they would do. They did not fight the way a Class 3 species with 43 vessels fights a fleet 4 times its size. They fought in a way that had no category. And the absence of a category is the most dangerous thing there is, because without a category you cannot prepare, and without preparation you are responding instead of acting, and responding is always a step behind. There was a young officer on the bridge that day whose name was Rath-Savel, the same first name as yours, which is why I remember it. He was in his 2nd year of service. He was standing at the analysis station, and he was the one who had said, at 70 seconds, "I think they have a plan." After the engagement, after we had disengaged, After the silence on the bridge had settled into something more like breathing again, he came to me. He was not much older than I was. He said, "Did you understand what they were doing?" I said, "I understand parts of it," he said. "I understood it at about 4 minutes in." I said, "What did you see?" He said, "They were not trying to win." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They were trying to cost us more than this corridor is worth." He said, "They could not win a direct engagement. They knew they could not, so they were not fighting to win the direct engagement. They were fighting to make the price of the direct engagement high enough that we would reconsider." He said, "They were not fighting us. They were arguing with us. An argument in ships and weapons and losses about whether this was worth it." I looked at him for a long time, then I said, "And were they right?" He said, "The general disengaged." I said, "Yes." He was quiet. Then he said, "I think about them a lot. I think about how they knew what they were doing and we did not know what we were doing. I think about what that feels like from the inside. To be in a corridor with 212 ships pointed at you and 43 of your own, and to know what you are doing so precisely that you can make the other side disengage." He said, "I want to know what that feels like." I said, "I think you have to know who you are before you can feel that." He looked at me. He said, "Then maybe that is what I should figure out first." He was 22 years old. He figured out some other things first, but he never forgot the corridor. None of us did. I want to tell you about the message the human commander sent. The one that said, "How long do you want to continue this?" Because I have thought about that message for 3 years, and I think it is the most important part of the 11 minutes, and it is the part that is hardest to explain. The message was not a taunt. I want to be very clear about this because the official analysis described it as a psychological tactic, which is technically accurate but misses what was important about it. It was a question, a genuine question, not, "We are winning, do you want to give up?" That would be a taunt. Not, "Surrender now before it gets worse." That would be a demand. It was, "How long do you want to continue this?" Which is a question that presupposes something. It presupposes that both parties have a choice about how long this continues. It presupposes that the question of duration is something they can discuss rather than something that is determined by who wins. It is the question you ask when you believe that the other party is capable of making a rational decision, and you want to give them the opportunity to make it before more is lost on both sides. It is, in other words, the question of someone who is not enjoying this and would prefer it to end, and is willing to offer the other party the chance to reach the same conclusion. I have thought about what kind of person in the middle of an engagement where they are outnumbered 4-1 with 6 of their vessels already lost sends that question. The answer I have arrived at is someone who was not there to fight, someone who was there to make a point and who had made the point and who was ready to stop now that the point was made. The point was, this corridor is not worth what you are going to pay for it. The question was, do you understand that yet? I want to tell you about what the general said to me specifically privately after the bridge had cleared and we were heading back toward Keth-Ra space. He called me to his quarters. He was standing at his viewport. He said, "Vel Kadorn." I said, "Yes, General." He said, "I laughed at them." I said, "Yes, General." He said, "I want you to remember that. Not as a criticism of me. I did what I had always done and I had always been right and I was wrong this time. But I want you to remember that I laughed. Because laughing is what you do when you believe something is beneath your serious attention. And nothing that can do what they did in that corridor is beneath your serious attention." He said, "I want you to remember the laugh and what followed it. And then I want you to make a rule for yourself. The rule is, never laugh at something before an engagement. Not because it is impolite. Because the laugh means you have already decided what it is. And if you have already decided what it is, you will not see what it actually is. And not seeing what it actually is will cost you what it cost us today." He said this quietly, looking out the viewport at the stars. Then he said, 31 vessels. I said, "Yes, General." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They were very good." I said, "Yes, General." He said, "I want to know everything about them." I said, "Yes, General." He said, "Dismissed." I left his quarters. That was the last personal conversation I had with him about the corridor. He never spoke of it publicly in the way commanders speak of engagements. He simply, for from that day forward, devoted significant resources to understanding the humans. I do not know everything he learned. I know what I learned. I am trying to give it to you tonight. Here is what I have understood, Wrath, in 3 years of thinking about 11 minutes. The humans in the Kessel Corridor were not remarkable because of their technology. They were not remarkable because of their numbers or their resources or their formal military training. By all of those measures, we were more. They were remarkable because of what they knew about themselves. They knew their shields were weaker, so they attacked ours. They knew their numbers were smaller, so they used every vessel to count for more than a vessel usually counts for. They knew their weapons were rated as primitive, so they found the specific way in which primitive weapons could be more effective than sophisticated ones if you were willing to pay the cost of finding out. They knew themselves. They knew their situation. And they knew what they were trying to accomplish. And that knowing, not the weapons, not the fleet, not the technology, that knowing is what produced the 11 minutes. That knowing is what made the general disengage. That knowing is what sent 31 vessels home damaged or destroyed, while 6 of theirs made the same journey. I have served in the military for a long time. I have met a great many opponents. I have met opponents who were stronger, and opponents who were weaker, and opponents who were faster, and opponents who were better equipped, and opponents who had better training. I have never met an opponent that knew itself the way the humans in the Kessel Corridor knew themselves. And I have concluded, 3 years later, that knowing yourself that well is a form of preparation that no amount of superior equipment can fully compensate for. If you know who you are and what you can do and what you are willing to do, you can find a way to use what you have that the person across from you has not predicted. And the person across from you has not predicted it because they were looking at what you have, not at what you know about yourself. The general looked at what they had. He did not look at what they knew. He will never make that mistake again. Neither will I, neither should you. I came home from the campaign 3 months later. You were not born yet. Your mother met me at the landing platform and she said, "How was it?" And I said, "Educational." She said, "That is not an answer." I said, "I know. I am still figuring out the answer. I have been figuring it out for 3 years. And what I have figured out is this. The 11 minutes were not about weapons. The weapons were primitive. That was true. What the 11 minutes were about was what you do with what you have. And what the humans did with what they had, in 11 minutes in the Kessel Corridor, was to know themselves so well that they could turn their limitations into advantages. They knew their shielding was weaker than ours, so they focused on our shielding. They knew their numbers were smaller, so they made every position count more than numbers. They knew they could not win a direct exchange of specifications, so they refused to have a direct exchange of specifications. They changed the question. Instead of fighting the fight we had prepared for, they made us fight a fight we had not prepared for. And we were not prepared for it. And 11 minutes after the engagement began, we had lost 31 vessels and they had lost 6, and the general was disengaging, and I was standing on the bridge learning the most important lesson of my career. Which is the lesson I am trying to give to you tonight, before you go to sleep, so you have it earlier than I had it. Wrath, the lesson is this. Never laugh at something because of what it has. Never rate something primitive because its tools are less advanced than yours. Because the thing that will determine what happens between you is not the tools. It is what the thing is willing to do with the tools. It is whether the thing knows itself well enough to use what it has in ways you did not predict. It is whether the thing has thought about the problem in ways you have not. The general had 212 vessels and superior weapons and 180 years of victories. He laughed at their primitive weapons. He was wrong. He was wrong not because the weapons were not primitive. They were. He was wrong because being primitive is not the same as being predictable, and being well-equipped is not the same as being right. He had never met something that knew itself that well, that knew its own limitations so completely that it could turn them into the structure of a plan. That was what he encountered in 11 minutes. That was what I encountered. That was what I came home from. That is the story of the 11 minutes. And the reason I am telling it to you tonight is that your teacher said something today that I heard once before, on a bridge. Before 11 minutes that changed everything. Your teacher said humans are easy opponents. The general said their weapons are primitive. I want you to remember what followed both of those statements, and I want you to promise me something. I want you to promise me that when you encounter something, you will ask what it can do before you decide what it is. And you will ask what it is before you decide it is easy. Do you promise? Good. Now go to sleep. I love you. End of recording. There is one more thing that happened that night that I have not told you yet. After the general dismissed me from his quarters, I went back to my station. The bridge was quiet. Most of the crew was doing post-engagement work, damage assessment, systems checks, the things you do when an engagement has ended unexpectedly and you need to understand the state of your own fleet. I was doing my part of that work. And then, at approximately 2 hours after the disengagement, a communication came through from the human fleet, not from the human commander, from someone who identified as a junior officer on one of their vessels. The communication was addressed to the Keth-Ra fleet generally. It said, "We were not trying to destroy you. We were trying to demonstrate something. We hope no one unnecessary was hurt. We do not enjoy this either." The communication was flagged by our systems as a non-standard contact and was forwarded to the general for response. He did not respond. I have spent 3 years wondering what the response should have been. What I know is that the humans in the Kessel Corridor, 11 minutes into an engagement where they were outnumbered 4-1, used some of their limited communication capacity to say, "We did not enjoy this either." They said it because it was true, not because it was strategic, not because it would help them, because they believed the people on the other side of the engagement were also people. And that is, I think, the last and most important thing about the 11 minutes. They fought with everything they had because they had to. And when they were done, they communicated because they wanted us to know that they had not wanted to. That is who they are. That is what your teacher did not tell you today. I found the recording 3 years after Velkadorn made it and 7 years after his death. His son Wrath was 11 when his father died. The family archive included a note that Velkadorn had written to accompany the recording, to be read by Wrath when he was old enough. The note said, "I made this recording because I could not sleep one night and I was thinking about the corridor and I thought, Wrath is 4 and he does not know. And one day he will be old enough that someone will tell him humans are easy opponents, or that their weapons are primitive, or that they are not worth serious attention, and I will not be there to correct it. So I recorded this instead. So the correction is there even when I am not. If you are reading this, Wrath, it means enough time has passed that the recording makes sense to you. I hope it does. I hope you remembered the promise you made me. I hope you ask what something can do before you decide what it is. And I hope you never laugh before an engagement, not because of them specifically, because laughing means you have stopped looking, and you always need to keep looking. That is everything I have to give you from the corridor. The rest is yours to figure out. I love you. End of note. The recording was donated to the Historical Archive the same day. Wrath was 31 when he donated it. He was, by that point, a senior officer in the Keth-Ra military. He had served for 8 years. He had never once, by all accounts from those who served with him, laughed at an opponent before an engagement. He had a reputation for the specific quality that his father had tried to give him on a night when he was 4 years old and could not yet fully understand it. The quality of looking, of seeing what was actually there, of asking what something can do before deciding what it is. He carried it the way his father carried the corridor, which is to say, every day, which is to say, it did not leave. The Historical Archive's note on the recording, added at the time of donation, reads as follows. This recording is classified as a primary historical source for the Battle of the Kessel Corridor. It provides the only first-person account of the engagement from the Keth-Ra side that has been made available to the General Archive. Previous accounts have been restricted to official military documentation, which describes tactical outcomes without the personal context that this recording provides. The archive notes that the recording has been reviewed by the Military History Division, which confirmed its accuracy against the official record in all verifiable particulars. The archive also notes that the recording raises questions about historical education that the archive considers beyond its institutional scope to address, but that it considers worth noting. The specific question raised is this. The child in this recording was told by a teacher that humans were easy opponents in historical engagements, and that early battles demonstrated this conclusively. The Battle of the Kessel Corridor is among the earliest documented engagements between human and Keth-Ra forces. The teacher's characterization of that engagement is inconsistent with the outcome, as documented in both official and personal records. The archive does not comment on educational methodology. It notes only that what Vel-Ka-Dorn wanted his son to know was not what his son was being taught, and that Vel-Ka-Dorn, who was there, made a record. So his son would have access to the version that was true. The archive considers this a significant act of parental care and historical preservation simultaneously. It is filing the recording accordingly. Both things should be preserved. What happened, and the fact that someone who was there wanted the person he loved most to know what actually happened. Rath-Ka-Dorn, Vel-Ka-Dorn's son, spoke publicly about the recording only once. It was at an academic conference on military history held 20 years after the Battle of the Kessel Corridor. He was 41. He was a senior officer. He had been invited to speak because he was one of the few people alive with a personal connection to a primary source from the engagement. He did not speak about the tactics. He did not speak about the fleet disposition or the weapons or the shield frequency or any of the things that military historians found most interesting about the corridor. He spoke about what his father had wanted him to understand. He said, "My father came home from the corridor different. I was 4 and I did not notice at the time, but my mother told me later. She said he came home quiet in a specific way. Not sad, not traumatized. Quiet in the way of someone who has learned something large and is still working out where to put it. She said he did not talk about the corridor for 3 years. And then one night he sat on the edge of my sleeping platform and he talked about it for the first time. He talked to me because he was worried about what I was being taught. He thought that if the teaching was wrong, he wanted the correction to exist somewhere I could access it. He was not going to be there forever. He wanted me to have what he knew." He said at the conference, "I want to say something about that choice. My father was a soldier. Soldiers do not traditionally explain themselves to 4-year-olds. They do not traditionally sit on the edge of sleeping platforms in the middle of the night and say, 'Here is what I actually learned.' They train, they brief, they file reports. My father did all of those things. And then he did the one that mattered most to him. He sat down next to me and he told me the truth. Because the truth was not going to be in the official record the way he needed it to be. And he wanted me to have it. He said, 'I think about that a lot.' He said, 'The humans in the corridor sent a communication at the end that said we did not enjoy this either. They sent it because they wanted the people on the other side to know they were people too.' My father remembered that. He put it in the recording. He wanted me to know it. He wanted me to know that the humans at the end of the 11 minutes, having demonstrated what they came to demonstrate, sent a message that said, 'We are also people.' And he wanted me to know that this was significant. That this quality, the insistence on being known as people even in the middle of something that was not about being people, was the most remarkable thing about the 11 minutes. More remarkable than the tactics. More remarkable than the outcome. The insistence at the end on humanity." He smiled after he said this. He said, "I think that is what they call it, humanity, and I think it is exactly the right word for it." The lesson in this story is the lesson the general finally learned, and the lesson Vel-Ka-Dorn was trying to give to his 4-year-old so he would not have to learn it in a corridor. It is not complicated. Tools are not the measure. Willingness is the measure. Creativity is the measure. The ability to know yourself well enough to use what you have in ways that the thing opposing you has not predicted, that is the measure. The humans in the Kessel Corridor had primitive weapons. They also had something that did not show up in any specification document. They had thought very carefully about who they were and what they had and what they could do with it if they were willing to do things that a more comfortable, better-equipped force would not be willing to do. They were willing. And 11 minutes later, the fleet that laughed at their weapons was disengaging with 31 losses to their 6. Drop one word in the comments. Whatever this story did to you, I am reading every single one. Subscribe to UG Human HFY. The next episode is a completely different voice, a completely different angle. That is the promise.